The first look for Civ 7 has come out, and I wanted to take a minute to look over what we saw because, truth be told, it does have me worried for the future of the Civilization franchise. While there was no doubt a lot of good, some decisions are in a limbo where they could be incredible or just fall flat on their face, which is why I'm separating this video into the good, the bad, and the worrisome. Good and bad is self-explanatory, but worrisome is the things that can either make this game a 10 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10. But before we get into that, I do want to take a moment and tell you not to listen to any Civ YouTubers, including myself, on whether you should or shouldn't buy this game because we are biased. We obviously want the game to succeed because that means we can keep dancing for Daddy YouTube's pennies in a super successful game. We'll easily 10x our viewership in a game we actually like playing. The average Civ YouTuber likes this game more than the average player just simply due to the fact that you don't get money and big on YouTube immediately, and so 99.9% of the time people who start YouTube channels typically do start it as a passion project. And of all the things you can make a YouTube channel on, if you choose Civilization, then that probably means you are a super fan to a certain extent. But if you love this game so much, got all the DLC, played all the games, collected all the Sid Meier penis lubrication, that's fine. You'll probably like this game too. But if you're unsure and only play this game passively, then I would highly recommend on holding on to my money, as this graphic that people have pulled out as some sort of gotcha is the entire reason I have this section. The last two iterations of Civ have launched in a putrid state and only got better after years of support and major expansions, and consequently, if you're not willing to pay $70 or like $120 or decide to do what Riot did and decide to pull out a $1,000 Dominatrix skin Yadwiga bundle for a game that will probably be undercooked on release, I would wait. As I know, I'm personally regretting my purchase of other 4X games that I previously shilled for in the past. Humankind and Old World did a lot right and made some decisions that undoubtedly surpassed Civilization, like the combat system for example, but after the full game was released, they weren't enough to make up for the chronic underdevelopment of the games that could have spent more time in the oven, which is why I didn't even bother reviewing Millennia for the Nintendo 64. I saw the combat screen and thought somebody was making an 8-hour documentary on a Flash game from Miniclip from the 2000s, which isn't to say that Civilization 7 is anything like that, since the art style looks amazing. Finally breaking the mobile game allegations as the rivers and environment are extremely detailed, buildings are realistic, and a return to the Civ 5 art style really does wonders for this game. Even if the claims of Humankind 2 are kind of warranted, you do have to consider that the last Civ game came out in 2016, and even back then the art style was heavily criticized, and so it would be expected that all the 4X strategy games that have come out within 2 to 3 years of each other would come out with a similar graphical style. But the rivers I gushed so much about earlier is maybe the best hope I have for this game being good. They're navigable, and while we only saw a scout, I would imagine that naval units will also play a part in trade and combat, for really the first time in the Civilization series. Because of the AI's putrid state, they'd almost never build naval units, and when they did, they just wouldn't use them properly. So the entire reason people have historically built an AV for trade, supply ships, as escorts are a moot point when you can put your troops in World War II ferries and send them off, confident the AI isn't going to intercept them. And if they do, it's not as if they're going to be able to one-shot or even two-shot them half the time. But by essentially making them pseudo-land units, you can now have your ships engage in coastal support. That could turn the tide of any war whilst also serving as a protective wall you have to overcome if you want to advance your units across said river. And the units you are going to be crossing aren't the same types from any of the previous Civ games. The new army mechanic is perfect. The fact you have a commander who can control units not only reduces the micromanagement needed every turn, but also adds in a strategic decision in any fight. Do you go front to back and look to win the battle that way, or pull an Alexander from Isis and look to smash the enemy general and scatter his forces? Which is also something the AI can do to you if you're not careful, and are just looking to run in and take that decisive victory. You'll have to be more careful, more calm, as losing a unit could be catastrophic, especially if losing a general causes your entire military to disintegrate, as your beefed up general is eliminated, allowing even a small army to divide and conquer, ambush the first general in favorable terrain, knock out the second before the third knows what's going on, which adds so much more depth to the combat system, just like the depth added to the independent peoples, who are a dynamic combination between barbs and city-states. Now, the policy of the independent people, whether it be aggressive or peaceful, will determine how you deal with them, and no two games will ever really be the the same when dealing with these people. If you're dealing with barbs, you can take an extra settlement or subdue them with influence. But if they're peaceful, just ally them and give them a suzerain ability that matches your current strategy. But even with a potential ally, you might want to spend your influence elsewhere. This new resource is the be-all end-all for diplomacy and trade, as you can use it to affect how other civs view you, and even give an advantage in warfare through war exhaustion. Even with a massive military, if your influence is high enough, you can give yourself the advantage to eke out a victory by retreating to your rice farms and waiting out the invaders. Especially if someone decides on forming some sort of unholy combination between leaders and civs that increase combat strength, which is a new thing for this game. While I'll get into my thoughts of civ switching later, I do like the early game decision where you can pick a leader and then pick what civ they lead to mix and match abilities. This not only increases replay value, but would work to make the game easier or harder depending on how in sync those two abilities are, while also allowing modders to create their own leaders for different civilizations. And like Skyrim has shown, mods are the difference between a great game and a great game that lasts for over 10 years. The only complaint you could have is that it's ahistorical, as Hatshepsut never led the Prussians, but at least for the leader section of this mechanic, you don't have to if you don't want to. It's just something you can try. And even if you do decide to stick with historical, the traits you give your leader through the skill tree increases the customization option you have for every game. If you want to pivot to a more science-oriented game as you're behind in every other victory type, you could just put points into improving your leader's science and go from there. And ironically enough, the science tree has its own sort of skill tree in that regard. Tech mastery is, from what I've heard, just an extra buff you get to that technology. Like if you research mining, the mastery would give all mines +1 production. This is another mechanic that I really do enjoy, adding depth to the game, as if you have 10 mines, then it might be worth it to fall behind in tech in order to master mining, which is something I hope the new massive AI team can take full advantage of. Apparently they assembled the Avengers, everybody they could gather to actually make the AI good, but I do need to slow down everyone's excitement. Despite all the other Civ YouTubers gushing on how hard the AI is now and how it bent them over their knee and slapped them silly, and that even on Prince the AI was just shitting on them. I mean, yeah, it's the first time you're playing this game. I'd be a little worried if I was playing a game in bareback deity my first try. So while I will take what other people have said about this AI with a grain of salt, I would imagine that the biggest complaint in Civ history will hopefully be fixed to a certain point and not just be survive the early game and then do whatever you want, like in other Civ games. But even if they give bonuses as a replacement for difficulty, they can still make the game hard by reducing the crisis management the AI has to face. Instead of a dark age that you shrug at before going on about your day, killing any dissenters that pop up, at the end of every age there's a crisis, and you get policy cards that drastically reduce yields, combat strength, and spawn barbs to raid your lands. This is great in my opinion, as you no longer have a situation where it's just super growth for the entire game. You'll have periods of decline and stagnation that resemble real-world crises before moving on to the next stage. And while crises are the biggest event chains in an era, them adding random events is really great. It not only adds flavor to the game you're playing, but adding randomness can save you and potentially hurt you in ways that you may not be ready for, forcing you to adapt and overcome any problems that may arise or give you a lifeline to a situation that may have seemed hopeless. But the realism that provides is immediately shattered when you look at the leader models and how god-awful they are. Augustus especially looks like Big Mouth's take on femboys. It looks like he took an anti-hormonal drug and reduced his testosterone to 0. He'd be a perfect poster boy for civilization de-evolution, since he looks like Curious George after a few generations of inbreeding. He's not the only one either. Benjamin is suffering from a parasite trying to compound interest his neck fat, and after writing this video I saw the Switch announcement trailer and Himiko, who literally looks like a Battle of Polytopia Polygon character. And if these are the leaders we get on launch, this game might be in for a world of trouble, especially with the way they removed leader screens and essentially have the leaders look at each other instead of you. Now I don't know how other people feel about this, but having the leaders look at each other just feels weird to me. It feels impersonal. It's like I'm Steph Curry coming back home after a day of lobbying against affordable housing and I see my wife cucking me again. It's just not a very good feeling. And at the very least, if I was getting cucked by Adolf Hitler or something, yeah, I'd understand. You know, I heard nothing goes deeper than a submarine. But instead, it's gonna be Edgar Allan Poe? William Shakespeare? Yes, it's the well-known American leader, Mr. Beast. I'm going to give whoever can bring back builders $1 million. I mean, what are we doing? By combining tile improvements, builders, and districts into 1, it reduces depth. You no longer have to decide between going for the builder or early defense or an early district, which is a big part of what makes this game fun, the opportunity cost. If you have 3 luxuries nearby, you could get a massive profit by selling them and even buy a couple settlers. But if you build it and get invaded by barbarians, well, then you're going to lose the builder, you're going to lose the improvement, and you're going to be farther behind than if you just built an archer, for example. And one of the other big problems with Humankind was the fact that there really was no strategic depth in deciding what to build. You just look at whatever has the biggest yield and just click on that. And if I just mindlessly click the same thing every game for 500 turns, I'm not playing Civilization 7. I'm playing the last 50 turns of Civ 6, waiting for my tourism score to supersede the AIs. But at least then I could at least try spreading my religion to speed up the game. Here, religion is nowhere to be seen. And I've heard people talk about religion being available in later ages, but that just doesn't make any sense. There isn't a single religion that has been founded after the medieval period, and yet they're being moved to the age of exploration. What am I supposed to be doing in the meantime? It's not as if I can settle cities. Limiting the settlements is just a pain. It doesn't increase depth or decision making. It's just a way to prevent you from getting burnt out by clicking on a new building to construct every turn. The biggest thing I hate in games is artificial barriers to what I can and can't do that really don't make any sense, ruining any potential enjoyment from the game, like preventing you from building an empire as wide as you can imagine. Something like Civilization 5, for example, where you could build wide and tall, and they're both equally as effective, means that what route you would take really depends on your start. Do you start with a lot of land and nobody else is nearby, and it's all, maybe not the best type of land, so you need a lot of cities? Then sure, going wide is perfect. But if you start with maybe not much land, or maybe the land you do have is really, really strong with multiple resources, then going tall and making these cities as strong as you can is the best possible decision. But the reason they made this change is probably the worst thing about this game. It'll be playable on the Nintendo Switch, day 1. What? The Switch was ancient when it was first released. 8 years later and it's supposed to handle these graphics? The only way that could be possible is if you had the original Tomb Raider's polygon graphics, and even that might not be enough. Lara Croft leads the United Kingdom. It's so stupid that could be a potential option. But after discussing the good and the bad, let's get into the worrisome. Now a reminder, these are core concepts that went through a drastic change from the previous games, and if they work, this game is a 10. If they fail, ignore everything I said previously, and this game will be a 3. Now when I say core concept, I mean something that the game is known for that differentiates itself from other games. Now imagine for a second Call of Duty decided to completely forego the shooting mechanics and guns and stuff like that, and instead adds helicopters, submarines, airplanes, and turns into like War Thunder, for example. Even if they have the best iteration they can make with that design, the fact that they switch the core concept into something completely different is going to alienate their fan base, and most people will put the game as like a 1. An even more pertinent example is a core concept of Humankind, the Civ switching mechanic, which just didn't work, and was probably the biggest reason why the game fell off. Which is why I'm so happy Civ decided to adopt the same Civ switching mechanic. I love that the reason they did this was to balance issues like late Civs being strong late and early Civs strong early, when that's just good game design. But it might just be worth it for the inevitable Adolf Hitler mod to lead the inevitable State of Israel mod. But the actual problem I have for this mechanic is more so how it doomed Humankind. It would make sense if you moved from Egypt to the Abbasids to, maybe the Egypt that's in Victoria 3, the one where Muhammad Ali was leading it, the Albanian. At the very least, then the abilities would be able to build onto each other. Like Egypt would be able to focus on food and production, and then maybe the Abbasids would have a religious bonus, depending on how much food or production you have. And then finally, the Muhammad Ali Egypt would have something like, for every faith you make and every food you make, you get increased combat strength, for an example. Stuff that builds into each other. And then if you want to go the Mongolian route or someone else, depending on the game state of the game, then fine, that works too. But in the showcase, you naturally go from Egypt to Songhai. Yeah, they're in Africa, that's close enough. You're gonna have Hatshepsut waking up one day to gunshots, walks in and finds Ibrahim Traore from Burkina Faso launching a coup, and she's in so much shock she needs T-Bag from Prison Break to explain the situation.
When this guy woke up this morning, he was white!
While I would imagine they won't do the same thing Humankind did, it just feels impersonal and is the antithesis of what Civ is. Taking a nation and standing the test of time. But at the end of the day, I've no idea how this will work. Maybe Mali's a misdirection and they'll have historical Civs to choose from, which is why this is worrisome. If it works, it'll be a 10. But if it doesn't, the game will in all likelihood fall into irrelevancy, which are the same thoughts I have about the slingshot mechanic. If you're dominating the game, but all of a sudden the new age kicks in and everybody's back on the same playing field and districts no longer work? How bad is that gonna feel? I mean, it could work and it couldn't. How punishing will it be to start all the way back to square one if you were in the lead? Well, I imagine if you're falling behind, this can be a lifeline and save your game. This does beg another question. If you will always slingshot to around the same strength every era, then why would the previous eras matter? I don't know how victory types work, but if you need to finish a space race, for example, then the first two eras aren't nearly as important as the last one. But at the end of the day, if it isn't too punishing and the victory types are spread out between eras, then this could be a great change that would allow people who had a bad start to catch up and make the game even. Maybe even making the late game engaging and challenging enough when you know there's still a chance you could lose. And so everything put together, will this game be good? What do I think personally about everything I've seen so far? Well, truth be told, it probably will be shallow and lack depth on release. And this isn't anything about the game. I'm looking at the previous two Civilizations and their putrid releases. But as for the long-term prospects and how good or bad it'll be, I think it depends on how the Civ switching mechanic works. If it's actually one of the best mechanics in the world and really pushes the genre forward, it'll be the best Civ game ever. But if it ends up like Humankind, then this might actually kill the series, unless they announce Civilization 8 2 years from now, and treat 7 like Beyond Earth. But I do hope they can make this work, and have trust in the team that they will be able to pull this off. Let me know what you think, and watch this video now. Peace.